E.T. phone home.
That worked nice. That was great. Well, I feel about today much the same way I felt about it in 1982, which is that it's just a little piece of wonderment in my life. This little guy came into my life and then everybody else's and kind of did his magic. And I feel very beholden to him. I owe a lot to this creature from another world. It'll be sadder if it's happy sad. You know what I'm saying? And I also feel like I made my most personal film in 1982 with E.T. And to this day, I think it remains my most personal film.
I'm keeping him.
Elliot.
What's happening? Oh no.
All right, let's see the line advancing a little bit. That's fine. All the kids in the movie are combinations of myself and my own family growing up. I had the idea when I was actually a kid, starting to make movies, wondering how to fill the needs that all young, lonely kids have growing up. And instead of filling the need with a terrestrial family member, I filled the need with an imaginary creature from outer space. And I think E.T. was really about the divorce of my parents. Mary's husband, Elliot's father, is in Mexico with Sally.
Where's Mexico?
At the time when I did the press junket and met all the reporters and talked about the movie, I never once said this was inspired by the divorce of my parents. But it always had been in the back of my mind to someday be able to just come out and confess that, which I think I did about 10 years ago in an interview. I finally came out and said, well, look, it's really based on that. I had been living with the story for so many years. I remember that when I made Close Encounters, and I had been living with the story of E.T. before Close Encounters, I had been involved and very preoccupied with extraterrestrial possibilities. And I remember when Richard Dreyfuss walked into the mothership, it made me sad, but not that sad. But when the little E.T. we called Puck, who Carlo Rambaldi also designed and built, when he returned to the mothership, I was really sad. I wanted that guy to stay back on Earth. And I thought, wow, there's a powerful story there. So that just continued to feed my thinking about, I really want to continue. I know I have another story in me, and I always knew I didn't know it was going to be called E.T., but it was always going to be about a boy who finds an alien. I had that story from childhood in my brain. And I pretty much had a lot of it worked out when I asked Melissa to write it. We were making Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was in Tunisia at the time. I was in the desert, and it was between shots, and I was picking up seashells because once the desert was the bottom of an ocean, so there's all these prehistoric seashells everywhere. I was collecting them. And I was just talking to Melissa, and I was telling her the story of E.T., and I had loved Black Stallion, which she had co-authored. And I said, Melissa, you would be so great. And Melissa at first turned me down. She said, I'm not a writer. I'm down on myself this month about writing. And she didn't want to do it. So we all worked on her. Kathy Kennedy worked on her. I worked on her until finally she relented and said, okay, I'll write it.
We determined that it would be a family with a absentee father. There would be a separation, so there would be the poignancy of that situation in the house, that the little man would somehow fill a spot he didn't know he was filling. We had to know who Elliot was specifically. And what surprised us is knowing that we needed to determine who E.T. was, because he was a character more than just a presence or a surprise or a visitation. He was a guy. So we developed his character. We developed what he would look like.
Ouch.
Healing was something that came up pretty early. Actually, I remember that I asked kids what superpower they would want, either to have themselves or to have this man from outer space to have. And healing came up a lot, that he could take care of hurts. We did know he was a farmer. He's an agricultural worker. He's a drone. You know, he's out collecting, but their affinity was to plant life. So then we sort of thought there had to be sort of a squishy, earthy, muddy kind of feeling about him. Personally, I never imagined what his planet looked like. It was just that he was out to collect foliage, bring home the seeds.
Come on, hurry up.
Don't be pushy.
The dynamic of the trio was really important and successful, I think. Knew Elliot had to be a middle child, so certainly older brother is kind of obvious, and the younger sister. I can't remember how this was decided, But in my life, I had always been a big babysitter, and there were many children in my life, even before I had my own. My husband had 2 children who were the ages of the boys. So there was a lot of eavesdropping and stealing and lifting. I would work for 4 or 5 days, and then I would go meet with Stephen, and we'd go over what I had, and I'd go back, and I'd fix it, change it, move on, have another 5 days in, go back, we'd go to over it and over it and over it. Probably for an original screenplay, that's very unusual to have that kind of collaboration going on as you're working. It was smooth and fast. It's never happened that easily again. It was 8 weeks, and it just flew by.
And I read the screenplay. Kathy Kennedy was there, and I came running into the dining room, and I said, I just read E.T. We're making it now. I said, this is great.
Okay. All right, so then we start right with the temperature one.
She only really did a first draft for me. I pretty much shot a first draft. There were revisions, but they were kind of revisions that she'd do on the set or on the, it was inspired work on Melissa's part, and it was ready to shoot the day I read the script. I like to try to get this shot here before we break. Action!
Elliot, look what I made for you!
I was 6, and I was just incredibly aware at that time. I feel like I remember everything as if it was yesterday. I met with Stephen on Poltergeist, but he thought that I was more right for E.T., so it was there was nothing wrong with that in my mind. I thought, okay, great. I'm glad to know you think I'm more right for something.
A little bit to your left, Drew. A little bit to your left. Right there. Look at him. Drew was the first person I hired on the movie, and I had met a lot of possible Gerties. But when Drew came in and began to tell me that she was a punk rock and roll band leader, she's 6 years old, and she's telling me she has a punk band, and that she makes up her face with paint, and thousands of people flock to her concerts.
I told him I had a band called the Purple People Eaters. It was a punk rock band, and I was the drummer. It was, early 80s, late 70s. Punk rock was really big then, so I was incredibly into it and thought it was super cool to be in a punk rock band. And he just empowered me to believe that, sure, if I wanted to be in a punk rock band, I could certainly be in a punk rock band. And that's sort of, I think, what every person on this planet needs, is someone to help them realize their dreams and help them find their destiny and to believe in them and to make you feel like you could reach your potential.
And then your mouth gets bigger, and scream! I said, I could use that imagination in this picture. She could help me make my movie better. I thought she was one of the most remarkable children I had ever met. And I immediately, hired her.
He's really real.
Oh,
And why are all those wires? Those aren't wires, those are his feet.
Valenzuela here. Valenzuela. Henry's screen test was a revelation for me, because I was about at the end of my rope. I could not find Elliot. Jack Fisk, Sissy Spacek's husband, had just worked with Henry, and they cobbled together a few scenes in 35 millimeter and showed me Henry. I loved the way Henry looked. I couldn't tell about his acting because the scenes were very visual, but I wanted to just see what he would be like, saying a lot of dialogue, and so I brought him in to meet me. Yeah. Henry? Great. You okay?
Yeah.
That was terrific. What?
I met Stephen when I was 9 years old. I had come out to LA for the first time. I was from San Antonio, Texas. That's where I was living. And I came out to Universal and had an audition.
And I said, let's make something up. Let's do an improvisation. There's a knock on your door and a man comes in, a grown man, not your brother. And he's from NASA. I just said that you have a best friend, and this is a creature. It's a best creature friend. And there is a man that's going to come in to your house, and he's going to be from the government, and he's going to try to get you to give this friend of yours back to him. And Henry, whatever you have to do, you stop him.
Now, young man, I understand that you have an alien somewhere in this house. Is that true?
And Mike Fenton, the casting director, played the government man.
Well, is it true?
Can't take him.
Well, I'm afraid I have to, son.
Can't take him away, he's mine!
But it's not my choice. The president asked me to come here and get him.
I don't care what the president says. He's my best friend. And you can't take him away.
And I got the part. It was the fastest auditioning process I've ever been on.
Okay, kid, you got the job. And action!
Michael! Get the bikes. Meet us at the playground at the top of the hill.
I was doing a play in New York off Broadway. A lot of people were seeing it and having me come in and read for other projects. And one of them was a movie called The Entity. And I went in for that and I didn't get the part in that. And the casting director, she said, well, you know, I'm really sorry that you didn't get this, but I hear that Spielberg is casting something that you might be right for. They arranged an interview, which was the day that President Reagan was shot. And so it was kind of hectic, the audition, because it wasn't even an audition, it was just a meeting with Spielberg. And I went in and I was just starry-eyed because Close Encounters was my favorite all-time movie, and I was starstruck, and all this stuff was going on with the shooting. And then I sat down with him and I felt instantly comfortable, and he made me feel relaxed. He asked me what my interests were, and I said, well, I like bike riding. And he said, that's in the movie. And then I said, I like Dungeons and Dragons, and he goes, well, that's in the movie too. They had me back for several other auditions with other people that were trying out for Elliot and some of the other parts. He didn't say, kid, you got the part to me, but later, you know, they had me back in and I got the part.
I know what you should do. Let's do it with the window up. Okay. And that'll help you shout more, you know what I mean? Robert was sort of the typical teenager, you know, in the picture. You know, he was always torturing and teasing his brother, the way I'm certainly, you know, guilty as charged of teasing my sisters growing up.
How you feeling, faker?
I'm feeling fine. Look.
So I put a lot of myself into Robert's character. I put myself in all the characters, but I remember specifically Robert, you know, where the hand comes in and
He came back. Oh my God!
that stuff that I did to my sisters to just make them nuts when I was growing up. And it was fun to let Robert be a bit of my alter ego. And he was the oldest,
Excellent.
but Elliot was the wisest.
Swear as my only brother on our
Don't
lives.
get so heavy, I swear.
You know, I like all the Tex Avery cartoons where you don't really see the adults except from the knees down. And yet I didn't want to make the adults' cartoons in E.T. I simply did not want to show their faces except for Mary.
This is no room. This is an accident.
You know, Mary being, you know, Dee Wallace, who did an amazing job, because in a way she was a kid too. I always thought that Mary was a kid too. She was suffering a divorce, and that kind of reduces you to childhood impulses and choices, because your emotions take over from your roles as a caregiver and a parent.
He saw me playing a call girl on an episode of Skag, which was a series with Carl Malden. But Stephen hires essences. He saw the essence, the heart of the character that he wanted. Do you believe in fairies? Say quick that you believe.
I do.
If you believe, clap your hands. I knew after the first read, I called my agent and my exact words were, this film could change the world. I knew. I always knew. I don't know why anybody else didn't know. I did. I mean, I don't think you ever know that the public is going to embrace a film like they did E.T., but I certainly knew that as far as the script was concerned, the possibilities were all there.
The first time you see another adult, the face of another adult, is when Keyes walks into a close-up and he's inside the protective clothing. And that's when you see the adult world starting to consume the world of children.
There's no response to 20 per kilo. Let's move to hypertonic saline.
Mike Fenton was the casting agent, and he was a fan of mine, and he believed that I was destined for great things. And one day he called me up and he said, do you have a fedora, you know, a kind of Dick Tracy hat? He said, grab it, and I want you to come audition for Steven Spielberg for a new movie he's doing. And he was auditioning for Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was outside, and Steven was in a room kind of like this, surrounded by these light stands and curtains. And Mike said, just stand behind the curtains, and I'll introduce you, and you step in. I cocked my hat, and I flipped my jacket collar up, and Mike said, Steven, I want you to meet Peter Coyote. And I stepped in, and your audience can't see, but all these big light stands have these long angled legs that stick out. And I walked just like this, and I tripped over one of these legs, and I came careening into the room, stumbling and falling over. Could not be the farther away from an action hero. And Stephen was sitting down kind of looking at me like, why is this guy here? What is he doing here? But I guess we talked, and I guess he remembered something of me, and then I was told he also saw me in Southern Comfort. And the next thing I knew, I got a call for E.T. You know, I'm only seen from the waist down for half of it. I got a letter from an old girlfriend who said, I recognized you the moment you came on screen. I read the script. They sent a messenger up. I'd never had that experience, and he sat in my living room while I read the script, and then he took it and he went back. And I got it.
But his being here is a miracle, Elliot.
I knew what it was saying, I knew what it was about, and I wanted to be in it. Of course, I knew Steven Spielberg, and I just have always felt that when great directors call you, you just gamble with them. You know, you just, if they're going to jump off a cliff, you jump off the cliff. And I felt that way about Spielberg.
E.T., can you say that? Can you say E.T.? E.T.
E.T.
It was tough finding a good look for E.T. because I wanted E.T. to be special. I didn't want him to look like aliens from other movies. I wanted him to look so anatomically different that the audience would say there's no way there's a person in a suit with a zipper up the back. And that's why I wanted to make the neck very, very slender and very long. I wanted people to say, oh my God, there's nobody in that.
At the beginning, we tried a whole bunch of different kinds of things. We tried a bunch of different kinds of heads.
And I began working first with Ed Verreau. And Ed did a lot of sketches of E.T., a couple of which are pretty interesting precursors to what Carlo Rambaldi came up with. I brought Carlo on board because Carlo had worked with me on Close Encounters, and he began to work on E.T. in clay.
I watched this picture back to me, the neck and the face. This paint was in the Academy of Fine Art in Bologna, in Italy. I realized that maybe it is a good idea, very original for extraterrestrial. Small neck and face protruding head. I made 3 little models in clay with little different anatomical point. One skin, one little fat, another, etc. With different dimension of the face.
And I refined it until it was something that I wanted, something that I could relate to, something that only a mother could love.
Steve come many times in my shop for see the model in real size. And I have just 3 months time for finish everything.
My fear was the audience would never love E.T. because he was so off-putting the way he looked. And my hope was that they would love him within 15 minutes of meeting him. I expected, because I designed the film this way, for him to be scary when we first meet him. But as Elliot slowly starts to understand that there's no threat here, and that E.T. is the most magnificent curiosity of his young life, I would hope the audience also would be breathing the same kind of life into E.T. from their own points of view. And they did, and that's what was important. E.T. wasn't cute.
Elliot, look what I made for you.
And Michael screams. Say no to Michael.
No!
The whole premise of the film hinged upon that believability.
Cut, great. Beautiful.
And that's why it was so important for Steven to really get the look down for E.T., get the design down to where people could believe that it wasn't just a guy in a suit. That's why the eyes were so important, and why we did a lot of takes of E.T. enunciating the words correctly with 12 guys working in unison.
E.T. phone home.
Faster.
E.T. phone home.
E.T. phone home.
If we had a pile of rubber there, you know, just pulsating and blinking a lot, and I wasn't emoting anything, it wouldn't have worked.
A real concern was just how much of E.T. do you see, particularly at the beginning. We're barely going to see him at all. That he stay very much in the dark. He would have a backlight There would be something that would just give a reflection in his eyes and a little bit of shape to his face. Every scene started with the same question: where's he going to be? Because the mechanical E.T., he'd have to be anchored to the floor. Our sets were all raised on a structure so that the cables could be snaked around out of the set without having to cross the floor, so that we would literally have a hole drilled. E.T. would go in that, the cables would run out and go to the operators. And the operators viewed E.T. most of the time via remote video cameras, so they could see what he was doing. And their sense of synchronization had to be so perfect.
It was never a thing to me. It was never a machine to me. It was E.T. There was a soul there. That's the only way I can explain it.
Look way, way up. Way up. Okay, now look down at the remote control. Look at the remote control. Good. Taste it.
I think Stephen, all of his efforts to keep the people that controlled E.T. off the set, you know, the wires were hidden, they were behind, so you never were really cognizant of people running E.T. It was just E.T. being. And I think that helped all of us.
Okay, here we go.
No,
okay.
Please.
Okay, stand by.
Where's my
right here.
voice of RCA? I had to figure out ahead of time when I was going to use the little people, when Caprice was going to use her hands and mime, and when I was going to use the fully mechanized character. I had to work that out ahead of time because it took a lot of time putting everybody in the suits. And then we had a young boy who didn't have legs, and he walked on his hands, and he gave E.T. the most amazing life. And when we used him primarily when E.T. had had a few too many and was stumbling around the kitchen.
Fall forward. Cut. Okay.
Sheerly by walking on his hands. He gave E.T. an amazingly out-of-this-world walk rhythm. And Tammy and Pat Bylon, you know, did some amazing work in the E.T. suits. And they were troopers because they were sweating in there. And they had to carry a lot of, especially when we were using the electronic head, that was 12, 15 pounds on Tammy and Pat's own heads. And that was very, very hard to do. And we had to give them frequent rests, but they stuck with it to the very end and they made it happen. I need you to pretend that it's nothing more than an animal. It's some sort of a deformed cross between a coyote and a rabbit. All of a sudden it's showing great intelligence. And that cracks you up.
Henry, he'd already done quite a bit of work with the ET, and so I kept asking him, you know, how does it work? What does the neck do? I know that, you know, have you seen the heart light up yet? And he wasn't telling me a whole lot, and he was saying, you know, you'll see. And I think it might have been on purpose, but that first scene that I see him in was the actual first time I saw the creature. And this thing comes out, and it was just unbelievably real. I mean, there's no way to describe how magical it was to have something that alien, that bizarre, actually working with you. That was just invaluable because it would react to things we were saying, and we could react to its reactions, and it was just like working with another actor.
In the closet, fast!
E.T. was absolutely real to me. I understood that it took mechanics and some people being in his suit and a woman doing his hands to make him manifest and come alive, but I just thought that he was a guardian angel, very real to me, and a good friend and someone who was teaching me a lot about love and how to take care of someone and how to treat people. And because he was there, because he wasn't computer generated, I mean, he was a very real, tangible being. And that's something that, you know, in this day and age in our technology, we don't have that luxury anymore of being so intimate with, you know, an alien, so to speak. And that makes him all the more real.
Picture Monday and I haven't used this for yet.
Touché!
Since then, I've just given up. You saw people coming over and powdering his face and adjusting the wig when he was dressed as the old bag lady, and you saw, you know, E.T. being treated with respect and dignity. You know, I think the entire crew did give E.T. his dignity. One of the things that really helped all the kids and helped the crew was the fact that I pretty much shot the film in continuity. So the kids knew emotionally where they had been the day before, and they pretty much didn't have any idea where they were going the next day. So like real life, every day was a surprise, and until finally, when E.T. began to die, Drew, Henry Thomas, and Robert really believed that this was happening to their lives. And I think their acting couldn't even be called acting at that point. It was just reacting. It was reacting to their best friend in the universe who was going away and leaving them.
Mom.
Movies are so sad, especially this one.
I was so upset because I thought he was a person, but I know he wasn't. Someone who was so kind and loving being hurt. And I know the people were trying to save him, but it didn't matter. I just thought everything in the world was hurting this person, and it was destroying me inside. I couldn't stand seeing pain brought to someone who brought so much pleasure with them.
Is he dead, Mama?
I think so, sweetheart.
We would want to come back.
It just really hurt my heart and made me very sad and tapped into emotions that I obviously had pretty close to the surface of, you know, not wanting a very perfect thing to be imperfect.
I don't know how to feel anymore.
Right, exactly. That's a good line.
I
Yeah.
can't feel.
You can't, yeah, that's great. I definitely want that line this time. That's very, very good.
In the case where your co-star is inanimate and made of plastic, obviously he's not going to be giving you a lot off screen. So Stephen would quite often talk me through the scene and tell me what was happening off screen that I was reacting to.
Look at the heart light.
E.T. phone home. E.T. phone home.
Does this
Oh?
mean? Yeah.
Does this mean they're coming?
Yes.
And so when I saw the film for the first time, I was convinced that I was hearing Stephen's voice over and over and over again. But of course it wasn't there. But I imagined that it was.
The last thing we shot with the kids was the goodbye at the spaceship at the very end inside our forest set. All the kids just were trying to hold it together. And if I did 3 or 4 or 5 takes, the kids fell apart on each take because they knew that they weren't going to see E.T. again. You'll walk all the way from here, right over to E.T., and you'll take your position in front of him. And the first thing he says is, he says, stay. He says, come. He puts his hands up and he says, come. And you don't have to say, no, I can't. You don't have to verbalize it. Just shake your head and make E.T. know that you can't go with him. He lowers his head real sadly, and he touches his heart, and he says, ouch. I think I went to Henry and I just whispered in his ear, this is it. This is the last moment between the two of you. And at that point, Henry just knew exactly what his heart broke open. And he held it back, and when I said action, it just all came flooding forth.
I want to know that you're my friend as long as I live, as long as you live. There's going to be a connection between us, Elliot, a connection. Come.
Come.
Stay.
Ouch. Right to the lips. To the lips. Ouch.
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 The whole movie all in was $10 million. And it was actually bonded by a bonding company. Universal released it, but they didn't even put all the money up for it. They had a bonding company to guarantee the completion. They wanted to make the picture, but they thought it would lose a lot of money because it was a kids' movie, and kids' movies were not doing well at all. And I understand their hesitation. No kid movie had broken through any kind of a ceiling for years. So I was absolutely happily in shock when it began to roll out the way it did.
Cut! Great. Beauty. Beautiful.
E.T., it's working! It's working!
It was for everybody. The adults liked it as much as the children. The adults shared it with their children. This is a communal experience movie. That's why it was so successful, is because you shared it with everybody around you. And for 2 hours, you were friends.
The interesting thing for me personally about E.T. is I didn't have any real experience. It's the first movie that I had ever produced on my own. I always look back at that being kind of numbing after a while. I remember Lou Wasserman used to call me every day. I was, just turned 30 years old. It's the first movie I've ever produced, and I've got Lou calling me every day saying, okay, now, do you know what it's done in this territory and this territory? And I would listen and respectfully, agree and say, gee, that's really exciting, and not really knowing what these numbers were in comparison to. And then finally, about 2 weeks into these constant phone calls, he said to me, Kathy, do you have any idea what this means? And I said, no, actually I don't.
It was scary, it was exciting, it was definitely a new experience, and one that I had not foreseen happening.
He is the cutest alien I have ever met insane.
I was 7 years old and I had never been outside of California, and the world already seemed so big to me. But all of a sudden, my whole perspective changed, and the world was so big. But it seemed like everyone still had this great connection on that they wanted to feel good and experience something heartfelt and profound together. It was really cool to see the movies being dubbed in all these different languages, to see myself speaking French and Japanese and German, and how neat that was. And I think that E.T. really taught me that there are no boundaries in friendship. And it made me such an open person. I mean, so much of who I am now is because of that.
I went to England. They had the royal premiere. Prince Charles and Princess Diana were there.
Fake.
I remember Drew gave Princess Diana a stuffed E.T. doll, and it was really, really cute. And then afterwards, after the movie was over, but while the final credits were rolling, they hustled us out of the movie theater, and we had a sort of a secret meeting with Princess Diana and Prince Charles, because she had to leave the theater to fix her makeup because she was crying. So we got to meet them again informally, which was just overwhelming. I mean,
In this quiet neighborhood, on this tranquil street, a mystery is unfolding. And an adventure is beginning. Again.
I'm keeping him.
E.T. is a movie that I probably get questioned about the most from young kids who always ask me, when are you going to make a sequel to E.T.? And I always say, I'm not, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I'm not going to. It's a little gem the way it was, and any future iteration of E.T. would only distill the memory of the first one.
With enhanced visual effects.
But I thought, oh my God, wouldn't it be great to reissue it? And what better occasion than the 20th anniversary to bring it back out again with a couple of enhancements to sort of, please the perfectionist inside myself.
Steven didn't want any changes to be made that would call attention to the change. He wanted the changes to really assimilate into what people remember about this movie. The whole reason to reissue this movie is to allow people to re-experience E.T. and to allow a new generation to experience E.T. We're not reissuing the movie because we decided there was something wrong that we wanted to fix. And that was extremely important to Stephen, and that's why, just like he would, when he made the movie, follow through on every single aspect of a shot, he did the same thing with all the shots that were altered in any way in this reissue.
E.T. phone home. And they'll come. Come.
E.T. is really the same picture. It's been enhanced by the current technology, which I would have used had I had that technology in 1981. There were certain shots that always made me feel that if I only had another couple of hours that day, Carlo Rambaldi's magicians, the geniuses that really created and controlled E.T. during the shoot, could have perfected some of the emotions that I always wanted. And the whole digital technology allowed me to take my pet peeve shots and correct them digitally. I always thought, gee, I'd like to be able to, to fix the sky, and fix the actual E.T. ship. Just enhance it somewhat, make it a little more interesting. I'd always wanted to get rid of E.T.'s run at the beginning of the film when Keys is chasing him, because E.T. was simply a light on a rail. Now you see E.T. actually running fast, and you realize, oh, these things can run.
Our challenge, how would E.T. run? You never see him run in the film. He kind of shuffles. He's got these little teeny feet, shuffles along. And we started to analyze how his body is constructed, and I think the creature that his body most resembles is a gorilla, because he's got these very, very long arms and these very short legs. We developed a run that was very gorilla-like, where he actually uses his front legs to help him move along.
I never had any really full body shots except when E.T. is on the floor and looking a bit like a Dunkin' Donut. He's all glazed with white and he's dying, and E.T. puts his hands out. That was a wonderful shot. It was the first time that we had really used Carlo Rambaldi's arms and finger movement attached to the actual torso. And that was very exciting. But there was no real movement, full movement of E.T. except when we had the little people and our young boy without legs inside the E.T. costume, especially for the scene inside the kitchen where he gets hit by the refrigerator, hits the wall, and falls over drunk.
Here's who? Man from the roof, but I think you killed him already.
But there was never really a scene of E.T. running. So that was at the beginning of the picture when he's running away from Keys and his men. That was the perfect time to have E.T. running past the camera, pulling up to a stop and watching his ship, leaving him behind.
At first, E.T. was supposed to do too many things. He was supposed to reach up towards the ship and then stop and then turn back towards the camera and look sad. And we decided that was all too much. Time and time again, we've always found less is more. And that shot simply was a wonderful acting challenge because we had to act it from behind. E.T. had to run up to the ship, stop, and just from his breathing and the sinking of his head, we were able to tell the audience he's sad, he's dejected, he can't go home now.
Oh, God!
That was a challenging shot because we had to redo what I always thought was a classic shot. And I remember trying to pull direction out of Stephen and saying, what is E.T. thinking? Is he embarrassed? Is he angry? Is he having fun with this?
He's embarrassed, and we wanted to not just do a generic embarrassed expression, but try to think about what do we do when we're embarrassed, and how do our eyes move, and what are we thinking about, and what does it mean when our eyes move certain ways. And we filmed a lot of reference of ourselves and our friends acting out the scenes, and we try to really get down into little finite details with that type of stuff. But
that's great. Oh man, that's beautiful acting.
Great. It was kind of like giving E.T. cosmetic surgery. In order to give him more expression, there had to be more digital movement in the face. Therefore, ILM had to create more muscles that were never in evidence when we made the picture with the limitations of the technology, of the state-of-the-art.
One of my personal goals on the project was to make sure that the effects are the way that people remember them. for them not to stand out, that it just flow and have the charm that the original did, and I think we succeeded.
Are they gone, Mama? What are you waiting for? Let's go!
The climate for guns was not as inflammatory in 1982 as it is today.
All she has to do is see one gun. If a few guys are just behind her, still bring your guns out.
But I was very, very sensitive to the fact that there were guns in E.T. I had put the guns in E.T. I wanted there to be an adult threat against the kids.
We made it!
But just having the guys with the guns anywhere around the kids always bothered me. And it bothered me more after my son was born, Max, in 1985. It didn't bother me as much when I made the picture, but 3 years later, when I suddenly was a parent for the first time, I took the world more seriously after having a child than I ever took the world before having had a child. It just changed my life. It was just the biggest catharsis of my life. And I felt that the guns were probably an inappropriate thing to do, and those guys could have easily been with walkie-talkies. So I thought this was an opportunity to take out the guns. There are a couple scenes that are back in the picture now that I really was on the fence about in 1982 when I cut the picture together, so I'm happy about that.
You were outside last night waiting for that thing to come back, weren't you?
There was always a longer day that Elliot had homesick when he faked his sickness by putting a thermometer against the light bulb, which, by the way, I had done to my mother when I was a kid growing up, and even though she always caught me, she still let me stay home from school. Because I'd be cutting my little 8mm movies, which is why I would always put the thermometer to the light bulb. My mom just needed a technical reason to say, okay, you can stay home and cut. And that was my technical reason. I think that scene, that whole day, was supposed to feel like E.T. at home with his new best friend.
Elliot.
And it's a very short day without that scene. But with the inclusion of that scene, there is a little more bonding opportunities for E.T. and Elliot to get to know each other.
35 pounds? But you're so fat.
Also, I like the moment where Elliot tries to, all kids do, they kind of say, am I taller than my friend, or is my friend taller than me? And then E.T. for the first time exposes and displays his very vulnerable and very, very elongated neck. I thought that was a nice reveal for the neck. In the 1982 movie, E.T. reveals his neck in front of Gertie and Michael and Elliot in the closet. And that was a show of trust. E.T. trusted these children with his life, therefore he could expose the most vulnerable part about him, his neck. But I thought it was more personal, because this is really Elliot's story, more than even Gertie and Michael's, that E.T. would expose that to show Elliot that he's beginning to trust him by showing the vulnerability of his elongated neck.
They had a special rubber puppet made of E.T. that was submersible in a tub filled with water. Given when that puppet was made 20 years ago, it was very limited in terms of its actions.
When we shot the scene in 1981, there's the moment that comes that Elliot pulls E.T. up out of the water. And what happened in reality with that poor E.T. was that about 50 holes in his head spouted water in all directions. But that was the end of that scene because it had not worked.
That definitely had its own set of challenges, one of which was not only did we have to produce a computer graphic, real-looking E.T., we also had to now make it seem as though he was submerged in water.
The Halloween scene was a scene I loved, but I didn't think it really, add to the story because I was trying to cut the time of the picture down. But it was a flavor that I kind of hated losing, but it still was a flavor that I thought if I ever reissued the picture, I wanted to put that scene back in, because I think it's one of the best moments Drew Barrymore has. When Drew kind of, looks at her mom and he says, "Anyway, why would he go out in the forest?" I mean, just her delivery was a once-in-a-lifetime moment.
Why would Elliot go to the forest? Why would he do such a thing?
How could I resist not putting that in? There were other scenes I resisted adding back. There was a scene where Harrison Ford played the principal. Now, you never saw Harrison's face, but you saw his body, you saw his hands, and you heard his voice.
I see you fine young people from good homes, every advantage.
And Elliot is called into the principal's office after he kisses the girl and releases all the frogs. That was a very sweet scene because it balanced E.T. trying to take all of the kind of speak and spell and all the different electronic parts to build his communicator, and he wraps it in a sheet and starts to levitate it up the staircase to the second floor. So as Elliot's in the principal's office being lectured and Harrison's back is to Elliot, Elliot starts to levitate in his chair and he starts to float over the principal. And it was a very, very sweet scene, but I didn't put it in this reissue for the simple reason that it was remaking E.T. too much, and I didn't want to remake E.T. E.T. really is one of the most perfect films I've ever made. I wasn't interested in remaking it. It's good the way it is. I wanted to just enhance it, and very slightly, to give the audience a reason to see it. And also, if I made the movie today, I would have used the technology. I would have used a combination of mechanical. I would have built an E.T., of course, and I would have also digitized E.T., probably much in the same way I enhanced the re-release. I was very careful not to change the substance of the story, not to change any of the characters or any of what motivates them to arrive together at the end. These are just like taking a very, very fine paintbrush and just putting a little bit of rouge on a pallid face. So I think I really held back on this, and it is the E.T. people will remember.
I don't feel like it was 20 years ago, and it's funny because I hear people say, oh, you know, that just seemed like it was yesterday, and it's such a cliche, but it's like, it feels like so close to yesterday. I mean, Steven looks the same, except now he's got the beard. I mean, it's amazing.
This experience of work was one of the greatest I've ever had in my whole life. It was such an intimate, real, family-like experience, and the chemistry was so real that we did really seem like a family. And then the fact that you not only get to play, but express yourself so much and be creative, and it was just the most perfect experience.
He won't hurt you, Gertie.
I think E.T. is enormously relevant because much like the movies that Steven has done now over the years, beginning in a way with E.T., is that he's exploring themes of tolerance. And I think, in a way, that's fundamentally at the heart of E.T. There's issues of abandonment, which I think, ironically enough, symbolically is the feeling of a lot of people in the world right now. And I think that there are issues of tolerance, which is extremely important in terms of the world continuing to go on in any kind of coexistence. And I think in its own way, that's what the story of E.T. is about, is the knowledge and understanding and ultimate acceptance of E.T.
It's a film about compassion, and I think that that's always a nice message for kids and for adults as well. I think that the film's message kind of carries through for audiences today.
I believe in you all my life. Every day.
I never pretended that E.T. would succeed. Had Universal gotten their $10 million back, I would have been vindicated. So I didn't make E.T. with tremendous visions of grandeur. I just wanted to get the movie made. It was very close to my heart. I had to see that picture come to fruition, and everything else was icing on the cake.
He's a man from outer space, and we're taking him to a spaceship.
It's a cliche now to say this movie is for the child in all of us. No, this movie is for the people we are and the people we have been and want to be again. It's, I think, for everybody.